The Berlin Wall, how communism turned Eastern Germany into a prison state. Oh boy, this is actually leading into some pretty recent history, like up through into the late 1980s, 1990s, right? So I figured we had the first half of this in the Berlin Airlift. Let's get into the second half of this and go down some history, shall we?
People are probably going to get mad and call this video propaganda, but in my defense, it's not my fault. The only thing you have to do to make anti-communist propaganda is to open a history book and start reading it out loud.
No, I mean, he's making sense. So that's the issue, right? Is like, when that makes sense, and don't get me wrong, on the other half of that aisle, there are absolutely some horrifying things about capitalism and late stage capitalism, right? Like, let's not even sugarcoat that. I'm a fan of commerce. That's what I'm a fan of, right? You go get a trade as an electrician. I pay you because you know what you're doing, and I pay you well because you know what you're doing and you're very good at your job. I pay someone to build and fix couches, right? Because that is their thing. That's what they do, right? People pay me because I'm an idiot on the internet. Let's be real. Let's call a spade a spade. But yeah, no, there's commentaries on both sides of the aisle. It's the implementation of the Marxist ideologies in the modern world that really skew away from the manifesto itself that are causing issues.
Today we're talking about the Berlin Wall. It is one of the greatest examples of capitalism versus communism, East versus West, hungry versus fed that the world has ever seen. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Operation Good Boy. It's a monthly subscription box. It's got all kinds of good...
Dog.
Are you okay?
Spit it up.
Don't puke in my office, please.
Amazing.
You're gonna get a treat in a second if you don't puke. Okay, hang on 1 second.
This is perfect.
You've ruined my intro.
Yeah. No.
Anyways, it comes with all kinds of cool...
Nah, hasn't ruined the intro. That spun it in the... That's how you get engagement. That's how you keep people on the video. Not what I do. My engagement numbers are awful. This is how you get engagement.
Stuff for your dog. We've
Take
got
notes.
dog poop picker-upper bags. We've got a little doggy first aid kit. We've got daily multivitamins for him. And then we've got Mushu's favorite, the TRE, the treats ready to eat. These are made right here in America. And Mushu is a big fan, right? Give me a shake. Good, you didn't puke. Wonderful work. Go ahead. Good job. So yeah, if you've got a dog, go check out Operation Good Boy. I'll have a link and a discount code in the description down below. Let's get back to the video. All right, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the biggest logistical flex of all time, that being the Berlin Airlift, when the USSR tried to blockade off West Berlin to force them to become communist and to join the USSR. And America...
You know, so I'm going to actually interject here really quick, because I think this has been kind of one of those things. I have done my best to kind of be as apolitical, in the middle, reasonable as possible, and it almost seems like YouTube doesn't even like that. So, I mean, if what it takes is, you know, talking about more videos like this, literally talking about the divide between modern capitalism and communism in, you know, recent history, cool. Like, there's certain things I'm willing to, like, you know, concede on and sugarcoat, right? How every other day on the internet there's a controversy, you know, at a certain point, especially if you're trying to be more positive and not just a drama channel. Like, okay, like, who cares? Who really cares at that point? Like, there's people that are gonna make living drama tubing, and that's honestly up to them. They have the ability to do that, and clearly they get paid way better than I do. That being said, I mean, you know, I would see how advertisers, especially on YouTube, would be like, oh, well, this is very, you know, very divisive as a topic and potentially even ready for demonetization. And it's just like, come on, man. Like, so the moral of the story is I might actually stop being as in the middle as I have, because especially when topics like this come up, and, you know, Fat Electrician brings a lot of facts to the table. And I'm sure I can cite each and every one of them with very little effort and prove everything he's saying fairly well correct, right? So just one of those things I wanted to mention, because YouTube, just within the past few years, is just, it continues to just decline.
America and the UK teamed up to deliver them supplies using only cargo planes, landing a cargo plane into West Berlin every 2 minutes, all day, every day for 15 months straight, feeding and supplying an entire city with 4.6 billion pounds of supplies. If you want to watch that,
it's so great. Like, it is a logistical feat, and I'm so for that. That is so awesome. And that is people coming together for a common purpose to be able to make everyone's life better. It's not just the few people at the top making everyone's life worse. It's, you know, it's not, oh, well, we're just going to collectivize everything, but, we're going to give, the means of production to people that don't know what they're doing, which has factually been an issue in regards to recent communism in recent history. Like, no, this is people coming together, using their skills in what ways they can, and trying their best to make the quality of life better for everybody. That's why I'm here. That's why I support creators like Fat Electrician, for bringing that kind of history to light.
That full video, I'll have that linked right here. If not, that's fine. Here's the bare minimum background info that you need. Right after World War II, Germany was basically split into two pieces. You had the Western powers, America, the UK, and France, controlling the western half of Germany, and you had the USSR controlling the eastern half. And here's where that gets weird. They did the same exact thing with the city of Berlin, where the West controlled the western half and the USSR controlled the eastern half, except Berlin was 100 miles into the USSR territory. And this is why the USSR blockaded off West Berlin and tried to force them to join, because they didn't want a little speck of capitalism in their communist utopia. But the West isn't about to back down from a challenge, so America and the UK team up, Wonder Twin powers activate, they launch the Berlin Airlift, they feed an entire city using nothing but cargo planes, and after 15 months, the USSR is finally forced to end the blockade because they can't afford to try to stop them anymore. So in 1949, the road...
That was actually, I think that's part of why the Aral Sea dried up, wasn't it? Part of the reason why the Aral Sea dried up in the USSR was, wasn't it cotton farming? I thought they ended up diverting water via irrigation from the Aral Sea to produce certain crops, and that gets into the conversation about the West versus the USSR in regards to us trying to price the USSR out of the Cold War, and that gets into, as far as I'm aware, that gets into Reaganomics, that gets into trickle-down economics. I'm not brave enough to touch on that because I'm not as well read on that. However, these are where some of these discussions go, and this is just more of the same. Like, there are aspects you can argue that we tried to price the USSR out of the Cold War, and there are people that have said the day the Cold War ended is the day a McDonald's went up in Moscow, which is, I mean, I think that's an incredibly fair look at it. I think if you look at it, I think that's incredibly fair to take a look at and go, yeah, that would make sense.
Roads and railways to West Berlin open back up, and everything goes back to working exactly how it was supposed to, and this is where the story really begins. From 1949 to 1951, we had what was known as a green border between East and West Germany. Basically, there was a border there. They're two separate countries. However, it was very, very easy to go from one country to the other and back. It was no big deal at all, which was really important because you have to remember, they just drew an arbitrary line right through the middle of Germany and were like, hey, these are two separate countries now. It was really complicated for a lot of people. You had people that had family members that now live in a different country. You had people whose home was in one country and job was in the other. You had farmers and property owners that now owned property in a country that they didn't live in. It was very, very complicated. And
so that's where, I mean, that becomes domestic and foreign policy issues, right? Like, I mean, when it comes, when borders get redrawn, when alliances get shifted, when one entity emerges the victor and another the loser, how many times throughout history, and I encourage citations of instances of this in the comment section. I do, because we learn from history, right? Learn from the past so we don't repeat the mistakes and make a better future, right? That kind of thing, right? How many times in history have we seen borders get drawn, alliances get shifted, what have you, and it's always the lower class, the working class, that are the ones that get hurt. They're the ones that are affected. They're the ones having to, for all intents and purposes, burn money for fuel because money has nothing left, nothing of value left to it, right? That was Germany post World War I, right? Their currency had deflated to such a degree. Was it not better just to burn wheelbarrows of this because it had more value that way? That's dangers of hyperinflation. So there's that. Then you also have, oh God, what are some of the other ones? The USSR declaring bankruptcy, right? And I use the term declaring bankruptcy because, one day we're not the USSR, we are Russia, right? Recent history. Well, I get fairly recent history. And, now you have Kazakhstan, you have so many other countries that emerge out of that still have issues to deal with, like Aralsk 7, right? Does Kazakhstan not have to deal with the fallout that is Aralsk 7 and the development of biotechnology is how we're going to word that for you two. Biotechnology, right? So yes, you can have your minority of people that are shot calling, that are, engaging in practices like this, redrawing borders, putting these arbitrary lines between people. Oh, you can't go here now. This is now that territory, right? You know, then suddenly you're working in in West Berlin, and you live in East Berlin, or you're working in in the USSR occupied area of Germany, but you live in West Berlin, right? And then it becomes just a hassle because now I got to do all this paperwork, and now my quality of life is going to suffer, and I might get sanctioned, my family might get targeted depending on who's calling the shots. Oh well, you're allying with the West at this point, or you're allying with the East. Well, these are XYZ consequences. So I do encourage in the comments section citations, if you will, and absolutely if you can provide .edu links, I would definitely appreciate that, because validity of times in history when things like this have caused problems for just your average person. Being an electrician in one company or in one country or one section of the country, and going to a completely different section of the country, another country altogether, that makes your life that much harder just to even exist.
Border is essentially open. A ton of people from East Germany are taking advantage of it and migrating to West Germany because it's way, way better to live in West Germany, where the evil capitalist pigs from America and the UK have been funneling in billions of dollars worth of food, money, and resources, helping to build West Germany back up as a country, as opposed to the USSR over in East Germany, who has done the exact opposite, because they said, hey, we want our war reparations and we want them right now. The USSR takes over $10 billion worth of hard assets and natural resources out of the East German economy and ships it back home. That is a third of the working capital of the entire country. Quite literally just took a third of their economy and got rid of it. And if that wasn't bad enough, they also liquidated almost every factory in East Germany. They took all of the machinery, all the parts, all the material that they had, and shipped it back home to the USSR. Not only have they stripped East Germany of all of their product, they've stripped them of their ability to produce. They can't even work themselves out of this difficult situation. Because of this,
so I want to know, actually, that'd be very interesting to delve into, because wasn't USSR communism, wasn't that seizing the means of production? I have to actually look into it. I have a lot of my history in that section of the world is actually rather lacking. I will admit that. That's something I need to dig a little bit deeper into. But at the core concept of seizing the means of productions and distributing amongst everyone else, like, what do you gain from stripping East Germany of all this? What do you gain from this? Some might even call it just malicious in general, right? That's entirely possible. So I'm very curious how and what the meetings were that led to that decision. And even then, the quality of life in people in Eastern Berlin is going to go down, and you wonder why Eastern Berlin is going to look at Western Berlin, not necessarily because it's the East versus West, capitalism versus communism, but it's like, oh wow, they're not starving over there. Damn, they have food, dude. Food kind of sounds good right now. What do you think? Yeah, food sounds good right now, and that's how you polarize people. That's how you polarize an audience, or polarize a populace, right? If someone's living better than you, well, what are they doing that I'm not doing, right? I mean, that this is just common sense, but I guess common sense isn't common anymore.
Understandably so, people start leaving East Germany in droves. Now, by 1952, the USSR identifies this problem, understanding, oh shit, obviously our policies aren't very popular. We should probably do something about that.
Probably.
The only question is, what are we gonna do about it?
Build a
Do
wall.
we A, come up with new policies that incentivize people to stay, making them want to be there and making them want to be a productive member of the society? No, absolutely not. We're gonna go with option B, old reliable, good old-fashioned human rights violations. Okay,
Nice.
so here's the plan. We're going to shut down the border between
Oh my god, it's because I love history that I laugh that hard.
East and West Germany. We're going to build a wall or a fence. And I know what you're thinking, walls don't work. Well, if the wall doesn't work, you know what is going to work? The landmines that we put on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, we're going to get guard dogs. And if the guard dogs don't work, we're going to put up a bunch of guard towers, and we're going to have over 20,000 men with guns watching the border 24/7 all the time. And they have the authority to shoot anyone trying to escape on sight. Now, obviously, there's one glaring hole in this plan.
I mean, that is incentivization to stop people from moving from east to west. But Gratz, you're now effectively holding half a city hostage and ruling through fear. What has history taught us about tyrants that rule through fear?
Plan. What if somebody is able to get past the wall, navigate through a minefield, evade the dogs, and they get seen by the guard, but because the guard is an East German and he probably doesn't want to be in East Germany either, what if the guard just doesn't shoot him and lets him go over to West Germany? Well, that's where the giant sand pit comes in. We're gonna—
The giant sand pit. So just think about it this way. This was the alternative. This was the option that the USSR chose at this point in time. This is the option. Like all of this as a deterrent, rather than incentivizing people that, hey, this is why we're different than the West. This is why you should be here. Like, am I just missing something here? Like, am I just... Yeah, no, Fat Electrician's face right now is kind of my face. I'm just like, am I missing something? Like, the fact that this is what people chose. This is what they chose to do. These border installations is wild to me. That is not how you win over people. That is not how you instill faith in others. That, oh yes, I'm doing I'm doing things different. We're doing things different. This is why you should be with us. Rather than hold them hostage, just incentivize. That actually blows my mind.
We're gonna line the entire border between East and West Germany with a 30.
Give me a second. I saw that, and in the diagram, sand strip, possibly mined.
Germany with a 30-foot wide pad of sand, and that way we'll be able to see any footprints when somebody runs out of East Germany into the West. And then,
so it's part of. I wanted to say entrapment, but all of this is just trying to hold people prisoner.
We're going to know that somebody escaped, and we're going to hold the guard on duty for that sector responsible, and then he's going to get in trouble. Having a very secure border isn't a human rights violation. Well, right.
I hate it. So I love when Fat Electrician does this, because he actually he mocks people that think stuff like this. It's not that it's the wall itself, it's the whole litany of other human rights violations that come along with the entire context of the situation. This isn't hard to grasp.
When you're using it to keep people out, but when you're using it to keep people in, it's absolutely a human rights violation according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let me just read that for you. Article 13, Section 2, quote, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and return to his country.
Oh. There's a couple countries that come to mind where you can't do this. There's a... That's for another video. No, well, there. Fat Electrician cited it. Right there. Oh, well, but you have to have the money to leave, or you have to... Look, is it illegal to leave? Is it legal to leave? Do you have the ability and the... Oh, I guess not ability. You have the right to leave whatever country, right? I can, hypothetically, right, money withstanding, I could go to just leave the U.S. for Japan for 2 weeks. As long as I follow all safety protocols, guidelines, etc. I'd love to go to Japan. I'd love to go to Germany. I'd love to go to Kazakhstan. I hear they got great food there. I'd love to go so many places, and I have the right and ability to do so living in the U.S. Other places in the world, not so much.
End quote. So yes, turning an entire country into a prison and refusing to let anyone leave while you oppress them is in fact a human rights violation. However, to be completely intellectually honest, I do have to tell you that the Soviet Union is one of only 3 nations that refused to sign the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they refused to sign it specifically because of Article 13, Section 2, which I just read to you. They basically said that they would only consider...
So what happens at that point, right? So what happens if... and this gets into international law, this gets into foreign policy, and this is, there have been discussions and meetings and briefings that have happened for decades at this point on stuff like this. If you're going to sign a universal document that says you cannot do X, you can do Y, but you may not do X, right? And someone doesn't sign it, can you hold them accountable? Or is it that if the majority have signed it, but the minority haven't signed it, are they still held by that same by that same creed? Are they held by that same standard, or held to that same standard? These are very interesting questions, and this is why international policy and foreign affairs gets very, very messy very, very quickly.
Consider signing it if this was added to the end of Article 13. Quote, in accordance with the procedure laid down in each country, end quote. They were unanimously declined because that would ruin the entire point of Article 13, which would basically just mean that, yeah, you have a human right to leave a country unless that country tells you you can't. So what's the point of even having that as a human right? So the border is pretty much...
Right, exactly. No, that's 100%. Like 100%, you know, gets shot down, gets vetoed. Like, no, this isn't going to... And at that point, that opens up a loophole, right? Where, you know, imagine if you're in the U.S. and, oh, because you have over $2,000 of credit card debt, you are, you cannot legally leave the country for any capacity because you're considered a asset risk, right? Oh, but it's in accordance with each country's laws, right? You get how that gets asinine, and there's justifications that get absolutely wild real quick. So, yeah, no, this makes complete sense.
Much completely shut down. The only exceptions to that are the fact that you can apply for a visa to leave East Germany. However, it's very expensive. You get interrogated by the government, and the only people to actually get these visas awarded to them are people that are working on behalf of the Communist Party, or somebody that is obscenely rich and is for sure coming back anyways, which seems like a weird hypocritical policy for a communist regime whose ultimate goal is to have a moneyless, classless society where everybody is treated equally. To have, but whatever. And then of course,
which thus itself is a paradox. And why are you treating somebody more than the other people? Why are they not equal? Why are they receiving different treatment? Oh, well, it's a means to an end, okay? But when do the means become the end? What are you willing to do to achieve that end? And that is a whole rabbit hole.
First, they have to allow travel from West Germany into West Berlin, and to do that, there's very, very strict routes anybody traveling from West Germany to West Berlin has to take, and they have to go straight from one, straight to the other, and they hit multiple checkpoints along the way. And this is extremely important because it opens up the Berlin loophole, because Berlin, the city that's 100 miles into communist territory, has that little speck of capitalism in it, and there's no border between West Berlin and East Berlin. So you can literally just walk from East Berlin right into West Berlin, and it's not an issue at all. So that becomes the only way to escape East Germany. People travel to East Berlin and then simply walk into West Berlin, and then they catch a car or a train or a bus from West Berlin to West Germany, and then they never go back. And between 1952 and 1961, somewhere between 2 and 4 million people do this. Bear in mind, East Germany only has a population of 17 million. That's over 20% of the population walks into West Berlin and never comes back. And of the people that did leave,
well, and that's how you incentivize people to be displaced, right? I mean, it is, and I mean this subjectively, it's legal displacement, right? Like if you are living in, say Ohio, right? Yes, Ohio came up again. Say if you're living in Ohio in this hypothetical situation, and you're like, damn, I kind of want to go to Indiana or something like that. But you are further and further de-incentivized from living in Ohio, or the ideologies and associations within Ohio, and how people there start becoming, right? I mean, it just becomes, you do not vibe with this, and you go to Indiana and you're like, oh, well, you know, I like this better. And then you stay in Indiana, right? You're effectively, being forcibly displaced. So this opens up another can of worms, and there's actually, as far as I'm aware, I'm assuming most of them would have been settled, right? But there have definitely been land and property disputes where in the USSR, someone had owned, a property beforehand. Communism hits. They're like, no, this is our land now. This belongs to this person. But then after the USSR collapses, it's like, well, who owns this land now? Because technically it was this person's first, but then it was this person because the other person was forcibly displaced, and it was theirs. But since the USSR fell, where does property ownership fall now, right? So very hairy. Like, there's a reason that, the Cold War is such a very charged time for people.
They were disproportionately young, highly skilled, highly intelligent people, like doctors, lawyers, skilled tradesmen, engineers. And because of this got the nickname the brain drain. So 1961...
Well, and at that point, your quality of life is now going to suffer. As somebody that lives in Idaho, I can tell you, we have medical offices, facilities like every block. It's actually quite ridiculous. You know, on one street you got a primary health, on another street you have a chiropractor, on another block you have an orthodontist, on another street you have a dentist proper, on another street you got a bone doctor, you know, another street you got an actual big hospital, another street you got some medical offices, you know, paperwork, insurance, etc. On another street you got you know, your mammogram, OBGYN services and stuff like that. There are so many medical facilities in Idaho that it's actually quite ridiculous. Like, I see more medical facilities than I really do any other business. It's actually quite unreal. And, you know, so imagine if you get used to this quality of life, or you get used to, you know, being able to go just a few streets over to get whatever specialist you do, right? And suddenly they're gone. Suddenly they're displaced because, you know, practices get abandoned, new policies get implemented from a stateside standpoint. You know, local economics don't vibe with, you know, they spent, you know, however much to get their PhD, MD, etc. And, you know, they're just not making the money, but they can go make their money over in, I don't know, something like Ohio or Indiana, right? Well, is that not going to displace people to move to other areas? And then suddenly the quality of life is lesser because now you're waiting 6 months to get booked for certain appointments if they're deemed, you know, that's if they're just not deemed as non-essential, because that is entirely a thing. You know, we have, you know, mass burnout of medical personnel because for all intents and purposes, somebody that knows and has lived with medical personnel, they get treated like absolute dog. Like, it is awful how medical personnel get treated. And there's medical personnel that are worse than those. I'm not saying that everyone's a saint. I'm not saying that everyone, you know, likes what they do or is good at their job. I've ran into my share of quack doctors, let's be real. But, you know, for all intents and purposes, if you start having these skilled and educated roles leave, and your educated part of the populace leave, well, I guess highly educated is what I should say, what happens to the people that remain? And see how this further feeds into a downward spiral.
The USSR is like, oh shit, this is a humongous problem. All the young, smart people are leaving. We got to do something about this. Should we, I don't know, incentivize highly successful young people to want to stay here? Nah. Break out old reliable, more human rights violations for everybody. So August 13th, 1961, in the middle of the night, a bunch of East German construction workers and cops show up with guns, and they put a fence all the way around West Berlin. Not to keep the West Berliners in, but to keep the East Berliners out. And East and West Berlin at this point in time were still very much intertwined. There were people that lived in the East and worked in the West and vice versa. And there were people that had family members on one side or the other side. And there were people that owned businesses and property. There were people that were seeing relatives and got separated from their families, and they weren't allowed to get back on the other side of the wall. There were literally thousands of people in Berlin that woke up one day and it was just like, congratulations, you just lost your job, you just lost your property, you lost your business, you're now separated from your family. Because of this, people started trying to break into West Berlin, or they were breaking out into East Berlin to get people and bring them back into West Berlin. At first,
right, and I think this is the completely logical situation for people. You have a government, you know, you have the USSR that is continuing to encroach in these restrictions and sanctions, right? What are people's responses going to be, right? If your boss, for instance, says, look, I pay you 15 an hour, I'm not giving you a raise, and you're like, I've been paid 15 an hour for the past 7 years, I don't think you understand that most days I have to choose whether I eat breakfast or get gas in my truck. Like, can I get a little more, please? You're paying Jimmy, who just started 6 months ago, $17. Oh, I'm not going to do that, right? What's the logical response? You're going to push back in what capacity you can. Otherwise, the whole misnomer quiet quitting, right? Look, I'm paid to do X. If you want me to do Jimmy's job too, you can pay me more. Like, I'm doing my job. That's all I care about at this point in time, right? I operate this machine, and this machine. Jimmy operates that machine. You know, you need to pay me more if you want me to operate his machine too, because I already operate all this stuff, right? You can enter something like that, or, you know, well, you know, boss, you're not really paying me. You know, I'm actually going to go over and work for Dan over here. You know, he's been in business for a while, and he's willing to offer me 19 right out the gate, and I have to do half of what I do working for you, right? Just mundane examples that exemplify the point. When you get, you know, the more and more you get pressed upon, the more compressed you get by someone pushing on you, you're going to spring back at a certain point and do something that's going to be like, okay, well, yeah, I'm gonna go do something. I'm gonna do something about it. I'm gonna go do something, right? So you get into the situation where you have people that are trapped in East Berlin, right? And it's like, okay, like, you know, we're going to do something about this. We're going to push back because we don't perceive this as fair, even though in the eyes of the USSR, this is completely justified. So subjectively, you know, the USSR thinks they're right and everyone else is wrong, but subjectively as well, the people think that the USSR is wrong and that they're right. Where does the objectivity come into here, right? And that's why we have certain international conventions.
First, it was easy because it was just a fence and you could cut your way through it or you could scale it, but that fence rapidly turned into a 12-foot high concrete wall. And then when people started bringing ladders to scale over the top of it, they added a gigantic round metal top to it so there was nothing to grip and pull yourself over. And then they added barbed wire and guard towers and guards that were allowed to shoot you on sight and turned it into a full-on demarcation line around West Berlin. And that is when the escape attempts got incredibly creative. One of the more popular ones at the very beginning was that somebody from West Berlin would remove the gas tank from their car and they would just have a little 1-gallon jug for gas, just enough gas to drive into East Berlin, pick somebody up, and drive back to the west. And the person would be strapped up underneath the car where the gas tank was supposed to be. But
that's incredibly creative and ingenious, actually. Like, it's bad that we've gotten to that point. That is genius.
And the communists figured that out, and then they had the guards at every checkpoint before a car could go into West Berlin. They would take a flexible metal wire and shove it down into where the gas tank should be to make sure it was in fact a gas tank. So then that plan was out. So one guy decided he was going to take his BMW Isetta, cut the roof off, and then he was just going to drive right underneath the checkpoint going full speed, and he was going to duck. And that's how he was.
Wow. That man, he's got some cojones.
Was going to break into West Berlin, and that's exactly what he did. And because of this, the East Germans added spike strips and barricades to every checkpoint. Every time somebody escaped into West Berlin, the communists fixed however it was possible. They made it more and more difficult, and the escape attempts got more and more creative.
So you see how this is effectively just an arms race, right? It's a proverbial arms race, right? They're increasing sanctions, they're increasing restrictions, therefore people don't want enough of it, and they're going to go and do what they want. They want out of this situation. So thus, you know, we have the gas tank situation. Oh, they got to up their game, and they got to, you know, start shoving wires down in there, right? And it's like, oh, well, you know, now we got to get this in place, which leads people into making it a pseudo convertible and just ducking and just saying, nah, F it, bro, I'm going through this gate whether you want or not, which leads into spike strips and stuff, you know. And you see it is an arms race, and people getting more and more desperate will do more and more just wild things. And that is the danger of ruling through fear, of ruling through oppression, of just not caring about others.
Some of my personal favorites include shooting a steel cable over the wall from a high building and then ziplining to the other side.
What a
Having
Chad.
somebody from West Berlin get a cow costume and tow a cattle trailer into East Berlin, and then have 2 of his friends dress up in the cow costume and stand in the cattle trailer as they made it through the checkpoint.
That's brilliant. That's amazing. So the real question is, and I pose this to all of you lovely members in chat, whether you're Marines, you know, Army, Navy, Coast Guard, you know, whether you're service, whether you're redneck, whether you're engineer, how would you circumvent this? With all the information presented, how do you circumvent this?
Stealing a tank and trying to drive it through the wall. And when you got away from the Berlin Wall itself and you actually went to the East and West German border, the escape attempts got even crazier. One group of brothers took a farmer's crop duster, painted it like a Soviet MiG plane, flew it from West Germany into East Germany, picked up their other brother, and flew him back. And my
That's impressive.
Absolute personal favorite escape from communism was when 2 fathers got together and for a year and a half gathered fabric and propane and supplies so that they could build a fucking hot air balloon to escape to West Germany. Okay, I'm gonna say that again, but a little bit slower. 8 people, 2 families, 2 fathers, 2 mothers, and 4 children escaped communism using a hot air balloon. Do you understand the gravity of what I've just told you? Because it's
that's honestly the most metal thing I've heard today. That is, you win. Like, you win the gold star. Like, you win the comment section, what have you. Like, that's the winner.
The husband and a dad, it speaks volumes to me that two men in my situation got together, looked around, and said these living conditions are so horrific that the best bet for me and you and our wives and our kids is to secretly gather up a bunch of cotton fabric, aka flammable shit, sew it into a balloon, attach it to a wicker basket, more flammable shit, and then propel it with a fucking flamethrower as we try to get away as fast as the wind will take us while the guards are shooting at us. Okay, look, all I'm saying is I've never seen anybody that determined to escape capitalism. That's all I'm saying. But that's not real communism. Of course it's not, because it's never real communism whenever something goes bad. But whenever something goes bad under capitalism, it's 100% capitalism's fault, and we should get rid of it and do communism instead. Granted.
So here's the thing on that, though, is alternatively, it's not real communism, because how many communist countries actually follow Karl Marx's The Communist Manifesto? Like, you could just stop that argument right there, because they don't. Like, the communism in the USSR, the communism in 1900s China, the communism in, you know, some of the eastern parts of the world. And even then, we have, I mean, like, France had a communist party at one point. That was how, I can't remember what his other name was. Pol Pot he became, right, for Cambodia. Really awful stuff that happened there. Pol Pot came over to France for a little bit and was part of their communist party. Like, there was at least a presence of it there. Wouldn't surprise me, honestly, if the U.S. had a communist party at one point, and that probably got shot down real quick. But, like, the crux of that argument is, oh, it's not real communism. It's okay, but, like, here's the thing, though. You have to practice what you preach. You have to, if you're following the Communist Manifesto, follow the Communist Manifesto. Don't say, oh, I'm this, when you're not this. Like, every system is going to have its problem. If anything, I'd argue the most efficient system would work for 99% of people, but 1% of people, it still wouldn't work through. As far as I remember, because my sister is actually the smart one, actually went to college. Like me, who tried it and was like, nah, I don't want this. I think the most... in regards to engines, and I'm pretty sure some engineers and mechanics out there will probably know what I'm talking about. In regards to engine efficiency, I think we can ever only get up to a 99% ratio, where there will always be energy lost in some capacity, which same thing. But I mean, no, like, if you're going to argue, oh, well, that's not that, it's okay, but this is what they're claiming it is. They are actively identifying as this. That is what this is being treated as, and this isn't even, like, following the source material, right? Like, if I claimed something was from Tolkien, right? And it's like, Kip, that's literally not how that works. We can prove this with his letters. We can prove this with Silmarillion. We can claim, prove this. If it ain't from the source material, it's not from the source material. Don't call it that, if that makes sense.
Communism, every other time we've tried it's ended in genocide and murder and human rights violations, but hey, I'm feeling it this time, guys. We're just like, we're this close to just one, maybe two more genocides, and we're gonna have that communist utopia. We should keep trying. The
ends at that point don't justify the means. No, like, Cambodia S21, for all intents and purposes, learning about that was life-changing. The fact that that is not more heavily taught, it is awful and horrifying that is the price that people are willing to pay and not even get anywhere near a goal. It is genuinely awful.
I need a beer. Jesus.
Yes, get like two.
Sorry, I got carried away. I apologize. Anyways, the wall around Berlin gets more and more impenetrable, and eventually the only way to actually escape into West Berlin is to dig a tunnel and crawl your way out, which a ton of people did. Now, obviously, this is a PR nightmare. The communists have to explain to everybody why on earth they blocked off West Berlin and they're not letting anybody through. And because of that, they decide to give the Berlin Wall their name, the Anti-Fascist Rampart. Fascism, obviously referring to Nazis, which makes this, I believe, one of the first historical appearances of the unfortunately still prevalent line of thinking that anybody that disagrees with me or how I live my life or my politics must be a Nazi. Yeah, that.
Thank you. Oh my God. Oh my God. Fat Electrician. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It is absolutely awful that that is still a continued practice. Thank you so much for that. Oh my God. And like, once, like, Fat Electrician was already like, I can't like show you my hands, like already like up there in terms of respect. The fact that he's willing to just blatantly just be like, yeah, no, this is unfortunately still a practice and it's dumb. Like, oh my God. Thank you so much for that. Oh, if you haven't checked out Fat Electrician, if this is somehow your first video, go check this man out. Please send him support.
That was the official stance of the Soviet Union, basically accusing every Western power of being a fascist regime and saying they built the wall to, quote, protect against fascist elements conspiring to prevent the will of the people, despite the fact that
you could also, from a certain point of view, say the USSR did it out of national security.
The apparent will of the people was to leave their communist regime, but whatever. Just excuse me one more time. I'm so sorry. I just have to Google something real quick. How to recognize a cult. Absolute authoritarian.
Had to deal with people that are self-proclaimed cult leaders. That's unfortunately a skill that I have obtained over my many years.
Communism without accountability. Check. Zero tolerance for criticism or questions.
Yeah.
Like getting arrested for political jokes. So I'm going to go with check. Lack of meaningful financial disclosure regarding the budget.
Yeah.
Check. Unreasonable fears about the outside world that often involve evil conspiracies and persecutions.
Yeah, that's a big one. One of their biggest things is that they will isolate you, and they are the antidote to that isolation.
Check. Okay, sorry. Anyways, back to the video.
I appreciate this segment more than you know.
Despite all the propaganda saying the Western world was literally just a bunch of Nazis, most people in East Germany didn't buy it, and a ton of them still tried to escape to the West. Over the duration of the Berlin Wall, over 100,000 people would be captured and imprisoned for either telling political jokes, criticizing the government, or attempting to escape. In just a couple years, by 1964, these political prisoners were starting to stack up really quickly, and the USSR had to do something about it because it was costing them money and the prisons were full and they had to get rid of all these people. So, I mean, what's a communist regime to do? Well, that's easy. We've got
easy. We got the gulags, got the work camps.
Got all these prisoners that we don't want. They don't want to be here. Let's ransom them over to the West. And that's exactly what they do. They ransomed 33,000 political prisoners to the West, and the West paid on average 4,000 Deutschmarks per person. I say on average because it wasn't a static price. The USSR put different values on different people based on their skills and job set. For example, a general.
So would this be, yet again, hear me out, treating people differently because of where they fall into society? We're going to ransom you a farmer for X price. We're going to ransom you a doctor for Y price. This celebrity, though, going to ransom it to you for Z. That's the money.
Laborer might only bring 1,800 Deutschmarks, whereas a doctor could bring 15,000. Now, granted, I'm probably reading way too far into this, but I do find it a tiny bit hypocritical that the communist government, the same government that supposedly is striving to create a moneyless, classless society where everybody is equal, is also taking political prisoners, assigning different values on their life based on their ability to produce an economic output, almost like they're putting them into separate classes, implying that some people are worth more than others, and then they're turning around and trying to sell them to another government for money, which is allegedly something else they don't want, which is, you know, weird. It's almost like it's all a bunch of talking points and bullshit so they can have a bunch of control.
Oh, this is why I love teachers. The teachers that are, like, really good, oh my God. Oh, they will. Oh, this is perfect. This is an amazing video. Because that is Fat Electrician, same page. Same, just that's bad. Yeah. I feel
do
that
this all day.
Yeah.
How long? What is it going to take to convince you that communism is bullshit? Tell me. I'll do it.
Your Honor, I object.
And why is that, Mr. Reed?
Because it's devastating to my case.
Overruled.
Good call.
In addition to the 33,000 political prisoners that the USSR essentially auctioned off for money, they also agreed to release 215,000 East German citizens for the low price of 2.3 billion Deutschmarks. Between 1945 and 1989, over 600 Germans were killed either trying to cross the border from East to West Germany or from East to West Berlin. And that is considered to be a very low, very conservative number because the USSR didn't want to release the actual numbers or admit that they'd killed anyone, because every single person they killed trying to escape communism was a huge political hit to them. Which raises the question, what happened in 1989? Well, that's the best part of the whole story.
Oh, we're going to get to David Hasselhoff. There was some, I don't remember exactly what it was. There were some David Hasselhoff-isms there, though. I think he was he there at the wall when it fell? There was some interesting stuff there.
By 1989, the Soviet Union was going bankrupt. They were beginning to crumble. They were losing their sphere of influence, and more civil unrest started to occur. And by November of 1989, in East Germany, there were protests, people demanding that they had the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the ability to critique their government without getting arrested, and most importantly, the freedom of travel. The communist government knew that they had to give the people an inch before the people turned around and took a mile, and the 1 inch they were willing to give them was they were going to get rid of the travel ban and finally start granting people visas. They weren't going to charge them money, they weren't going to have some special circumstance to do it, and most importantly, they were actually going to approve people and they were going to do it quickly. These new travel regulations were drafted on November 8th, they were going to be announced to the public on November 9th on live TV, and on November 10th they would go into effect and people could show up to the passport office, apply, and ideally get accepted and have the freedom to travel west. And that's kind of what happened. November 8th, the new regulations get drafted, that's fine. November 9th, they hand the new regulations to a government spokesperson by the name of Gunter Schabowski, and he's going to read them on a government press conference on live TV. He didn't have time to read through all the papers, nobody took the time to explain it to him, so on live TV, he just kind of wings it.
We'll do it live. Fuck it.
He reads off what he thinks is important, which is just, here's the new rules that we're living by, and everybody's like pretty happy about it, and one journalist asks, when does this go into effect? And Gunter, not having time to have read through all the papers, kind of shuffles through them real quick, looking for an effective date, and which he doesn't see one. It's there, he just doesn't see it. So he just kind of shrugs and he's like, as far as I know, quote, immediately, without delay.
Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis ist das sofort.
And with
Oh my god. Oh, someone in the USSR had a heart attack when they saw that. Someone somewhere had a heart attack with that. They keeled over. They said, "Oh."
that going out on live TV, East Germans got up and started going to the wall. Now, this announcement was at the ass end of a boring government press conference, so not a lot of people saw it, but then the news outlets started picking it up and they started airing it, both in East and West Germany, and then even more people started showing up on both sides of the wall. And within just a few hours, tens of thousands of people had shown up to Checkpoint Charlie, one of the main checkpoints for the Berlin Wall, to go from east to west, and they demanded to be let go because they had just been told by their government on live TV that they had the freedom of travel, and the guards had no idea what was going on, and they were outnumbered tens of thousands to one. And eventually the guards were forced to simply let people through, and then word spread that they actually let them through, and all of Berlin, both east and west, came out and had basically the biggest block party the world has ever seen, as a city that had been divided in half for 28 years was finally reunited. And then they celebrated this reunification by tearing down the wall that had separated them for so long. In conclusion, Germany after World War II is the closest thing to a controlled experiment that you can have, pitting capitalism against communism to see which one would triumph in real life. They took one country with one people, divided it down the middle, and gave each a set of rules to live by. And while capitalism is far from perfect and it has a ton of things that we can improve upon, I think the results of this experiment speak for themselves. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
No, that was a very fair analysis and video. That very good video from him. I'm very happy about this. This tickled my bone. That came out weird. I was gonna say tickle my funny bone, but that didn't. You know what? We're moving on. No, this was great. This was great. And arguably, if capitalism can work, okay, you're gonna have to bring more to the table, right? If I'm gonna bring to the table, alkali earth metals don't explode on contact with water, right? It is burden of proof falls on to me to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt in the face of existing science, right? Communism can work in a large government capacity. Okay, you're gonna have to bring stuff to the table that proves this, what you're doing different, and proves that it does work beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Not saying that not saying that capitalism, especially the way it ended up, is perfect. I'm not saying that socialism and the concepts that it brings are perfect. I think that people need to come together with common understanding around a table and talk about things and try to work in the best interest of the many versus the best interest of the few. And would I have said this even 2 weeks ago? No, because YouTube advertisers, current YouTube, constant cancellation fears, and it's just like I don't care anymore. I feel I'm a reasonable person. People say, yeah, Kip, you're a decent person. You try your best. So I'm gonna trust them on that one. And yeah, don't really care. Like this was brought together in a very approachable capacity. This was brought together in a very informative capacity. And I think Fat Electrician has points that I couldn't contest if I wanted to. So yeah, that's kind of what I got for you today. And yes, if you haven't checked it out, go check out the Fat Electrician. He's an awesome creator. I absolutely love his content, and I know that he won't watch this, but thank you for continuing to do what you do. There has been a lack of creators and individuals that do what you do, and especially in an era where teachers are as vilified and looked down on and under-supported as they are. Thank you for being just an absolute G. Thank you for being an absolute legend. And I will continue to send as many people as I can over to you, Fat Electrician, you absolute legend. But I digress. If you haven't seen the Fat Electrician, do yourself a favor and check him out. If you have any stories throughout history, in addition, like I said, post that in the comments section. And let me know what you think about Kip that is willing to not really give a damn, if that makes sense, and is just here to have a good time, is here to be informative, is here to engage with you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you. Have a good one.